The tavern's air was thick with smoke and whispered secrets, a cacophony of hushed voices drowned beneath the clink of glasses and the distant howls from the streets above. Lucille sat at a scarred wooden table, her dark hair caught loosely in the dim lantern light, eyes burning with a fierce determination that no hardship had managed to extinguish. Around her, a small group of ragged men and women leaned in close, their faces a mixture of fear and resolve. She spoke in low tones, outlining routes through the city's labyrinthine alleys and safe houses beneath the noses of the ever-watchful Revolutionary Guards. Each word was weighed with care, each plan a thread in the fragile tapestry of resistance she was weaving. Tyne lingered at the edge of the room, his heart pounding with a mixture of admiration and trepidation. His cautious nature warred with the urgent need to act, but Lucille's courage was a beacon in the darkness that threatened to consume them all. He watched as she moved among the group, her voice steady even when her hands trembled beneath her shawl. Each new alley represented a risk, a potential crack in the fragile shield protecting the forbidden clock he guarded so jealously. Yet it was also a lifeline, a chance to ignite the spark of rebellion that could one day shatter the regime's iron grip. Later, in the sanctity of his workshop, Tyne found a brief moment of reprieve. The soft ticking of the forbidden clock filled the silence between them, a heartbeat of defiance against the relentless passage of time. Lucille's presence was a balm to his weary soul, her eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight, and something more tender, a promise of something beyond fear and survival. They exchanged hesitant glances, words careful and measured, as if afraid to shatter the fragile connection forming in the shadows. "You are braver than you know," Tyne whispered, his voice barely audible. She smiled, a fleeting warmth that contrasted with the cold world outside. "We must be brave for all who have lost their voices." Their moment was abruptly interrupted by a shadow at the workshop door. Jack stepped inside, his scarred face etched with a wariness born of countless battles, both external and within. His eyes darted suspiciously, weighing the room and its occupants. "We cannot afford mistakes," he said gruffly, his voice a reminder of the ever-present danger lurking in every corner of the city. Tien met his gaze, the tension palpable. Trust was a rare commodity, and Jack's ambiguous loyalties cast a long shadow over their fragile alliance. As the night deepened, Lucille slipped a folded note into Tiny's hand beneath the pale glow of the moon. Their fingers brushed briefly, a fleeting spark of warmth amid the chill of oppression. The note contained directions and coded signals, vital information for the next phase of their resistance. Tyne's heart quickened, not just from the weight of the message, but from the quiet promise in Lucille's eyes. In that moment, amidst the ticking clock and the looming threat of discovery, a fragile light flickered, hope. Yet the path ahead was fraught with peril. Every new alley risked exposure, every whispered plan could unravel their careful work. Tien wrestled with his own fears, torn between the desire to protect the clock and the growing conviction that defiance required sacrifice. Lucille's resolve was infectious, challenging him to step beyond the shadows of caution into the uncertain dawn of rebellion. The chapter closes on Tyne standing at the threshold of his workshop, the city's restless heartbeat echoing around him. The forbidden clock ticks on, a relentless reminder that time is both their enemy and their call to arms. With Lucille's hand intertwined with his own, he steps forward, ready to face whatever dawn brings, fueled by a courage born of love, loss, and unyielding hope. The tavern was a shadowed refuge amid the relentless twilight of Paris, its low ceiling and cramped tables packed with murmurs and the clink of cheap glasses. Jack sat hunched in the corner, his scarred hands wrapped around a chipped cup, the flickering candlelight casting a restless dance of shadows over his rugged face. The air was thick with smoke and secrets, and the weight of unspoken truths pressed upon the small room, like the heavy stone walls themselves. Tyne approached cautiously, his pale eyes narrowing as he took the seat opposite the former soldier. Jax's gaze flickered up, wary and guarded, the flickers of doubt and pain barely concealed beneath the surface. "You wanted to speak," Teen said quietly, the low murmur of voices around them a faint counterpoint to the pounding of his heart. Jax nodded, his voice a rough whisper. "I walk a thin line, Teen, between the Republic's eyes and the shadows that hide us. I give them what they need, but never all. There's a price to pay for survival, and I pay with every breath." Tyne studied him, weighing the truth behind the scars and secrets. The man was a paradox, cynical and pragmatic, yet beneath it all, a flicker of hope that refused to be snuffed out. "And what of your hope?" Tyne pressed. "Does it not invite risk?" Jax's eyes darkened, the flicker of a haunted past surfacing. "Hope is a luxury in these times. But I hold on to it because revenge is patient. It waits for the moment when the scales can be tipped." The conversation was interrupted by a sudden clatter as the door swung open, letting in a cold draft and a pair of revolutionary guards who scanned the room with sharp eyes. Jax tensed but remained still, the practiced calm of a man who had learned to survive under watchful gazes. Later that night, Tyne found himself wandering the narrow alleys, the fog curling like ghostly fingers around the cobblestones. The distant clatter of boots and the occasional shout of patrols were constant reminders of the peril that shadowed every step. Jax's words echoed in his mind, the uncertainty gnawing at his resolve. Was the man a friend or a threat? Could the resistance afford the luxury of doubt, or was trust their only weapon against the encroaching darkness? The forbidden clock ticked steadily in his heart, its defiant rhythm a counterpoint to the oppressive silence of the night. Back in the safety of the workshop, Lucille awaited him, her dark eyes sharp and unwavering. "We can't afford shadows, Teen," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Jax walks a dangerous path. We need to know where his loyalties truly lie before it's too late." That evening, in a quiet corner filled with the scent of oil and metal, Lucille confronted Jax. Her words were firm but laced with compassion, a plea for truth amid the tangled web of deception. Jax met her gaze steadily, the flickering light of the forbidden clock casting a pale glow that seemed to hold both promise and peril. "I want to believe in your cause," he admitted, "but the chains of my past and the eyes that watch me make every step a gamble. I risk all to keep our hope alive, but the price, it grows heavier every day." The resistance gathered soon after in a cramped room, the air thick with tension and the scent of candle wax. Jax's silence during the meeting was deafening, the unspoken questions pressing down on Tyne and Lucille like a weight too great to bear. Trust had always been fragile, but now it felt like a thread stretched to its breaking point. As the meeting dispersed, Tyne lingered, his thoughts a storm of doubt and determination. The clock's ticking was a steady reminder that time was slipping away, and with it, the chance to ignite the spark of rebellion. Jax's shadow loomed large, a reminder that survival in this cruel world required sacrifices both seen and hidden. Tien knew one thing with certainty: their fragile alliance would be tested like never before, and the cost of betrayal might be more than any of them could bear. Yet beneath the fear and mistrust, a flicker of hope remained, a stubborn ember that refused to be extinguished, even in the darkest shadow of revolution. The night deepened, and with it, the quiet pulse of defiance that beat within Tyne's heart. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with peril and doubt, but he would walk it still, because the price of silence was far greater than the risk of trust. And so, beneath the weight of shadows and the relentless ticking of a forbidden clock, the story of resistance and redemption continued to unfold, one breath, one secret, and one fragile hope at a time. The hour was late, but the fight was far from over. The tavern's door creaked shut behind him, the cold night swallowing his silhouette as he disappeared into the labyrinth of Parisian streets alone, wary but unyielding. The shadow of Jax lingered, a silent question that refused to fade. In a world ruled by fear, who could one truly trust? The clock ticked on. The muted light of dawn filtered through the grimy window panes of the workshop, casting fractured patterns across the dust-laden wooden floor. I sat hunched over the battered workbench, my fingers trembling only slightly as they fitted the tiny cogwheel into place. Beside me, Henry watched with wide, eager eyes, his youthful face illuminated by the faint glow of the oil lamp that flickered against the encroaching grey morning. "Steady now," I whispered, guiding his unsteady hands. "The mechanism must breathe, not choke. Each part moves in harmony, like the pulse of a heart." Henry nodded solemnly, his lips pressed into a thin line of concentration. The innocence in his gaze was a stark contrast to the harsh world that pressed against the fragile walls of our sanctuary. He was but a boy, yet in his hands lay the fragile hope that the future might yet be redeemed from the shadows of the past. Madame Fournier was already stirring in the back room, her footsteps muffled but purposeful. She had taken to watching over us with a protective vigilance that belied her quiet demeanor. I could hear the faint clinking of teacups and the rustle of worn fabric as she prepared a meager breakfast. The shop was more than a place of work. It was a refuge, a bastion against the relentless tide of suspicion and fear that swept through Paris. Henry's apprenticeship had begun months ago, a cautious decision born of necessity and hope. The boy's father had vanished in the early days of the Terror, leaving Henry adrift in a sea of uncertainty. It was Madame Fournier who had brought him to me, pressing his small, trembling hands into mine and urging me to teach him the craft that had once been my family's legacy. "You must be careful," I warned him during one of our first sessions, the memory sharp and bitter. "The regime hunts those who remember the old ways. Timepieces are forbidden, a symbol of the privilege they seek to erase. But in these small gears and springs lies a rebellion more profound than any shouted slogan." Henry listened, absorbing my words with a seriousness that both warmed and saddened me. His youth was a rare bloom in these dark times, a fragile light flickering against the gathering storm. That afternoon, Madame Fournier summoned me quietly to the front of the shop. Her face was drawn, eyes shadowed with worry. "Guards have been patrolling more frequently," she murmured, glancing toward the street. "They linger longer near the workshops. We must be cautious." I nodded, the weight of her words settling heavy in my chest. The forbidden clock, the very heartbeat of our resistance, rested hidden behind a false panel in the back room. Its silent, defiant ticking was the pulse of hope amid despair. Yet with each passing day, the danger grew and the walls seemed to close in. That evening, Henry and I shared a simple meal by candlelight. The flickering flame cast long shadows across the worn wooden table, the silence between us filled with unspoken dreams and fears. "Do you think there will be a day when we can tell time without fear?" Henry asked softly, his voice barely above a whisper. I smiled faintly, the corners of my mouth aching with the weight of years. "I believe there will be," I said. "But it will be a day forged from courage and sacrifice, a day when we refuse to be prisoners of the hourglass." As the candle guttered low, a sudden knock at the door startled us. Lucille slipped inside, her dark eyes sharp with urgency. "The patrols are tightening," she said, breathless. "We must be ready." The fragile piece of our refuge shattered like glass. I met Henry's gaze, seeing in his youthful eyes the dawning understanding of the peril that surrounded us. Yet beneath the fear there was a spark, an unyielding hope that the craft of watchmaking, the defiance of time itself, might yet endure. "Prepare yourself," I whispered, steeling my voice against the tremor of dread. "The night is long, and our fight has only just begun." Outside, the city held its breath, caught between the ticking silence of forbidden clocks and the distant echo of a future waiting to be claimed. And so, beneath the weight of oppression and the shadow of the guillotine, a young apprentice learned not only the delicate art of watchmaking, but the quiet rebellion of hope, a hope that, even in the darkest hour, the hands of time could be turned toward freedom. The workshop door closed softly behind Lucille, and the ticking continued, a heartbeat against the silence. a promise that time, though outlawed, was not yet conquered. In the days that followed, I watched Henry grow steadier, his hands more confident as he mastered the intricate dance of gears and springs. Each watch we repaired, each secret clock we tended, was a thread woven into the tapestry of resistance. Madame Fournier's watchful gaze never wavered, her presence a shield as much as any weapon. Yet danger lurked in every shadow. The city was a cage tightening with every patrol, every whispered denunciation. The faces of those lost haunted my dreams, their silent cries a constant reminder of the cost of defiance. One evening, as Henry carefully polished a newly repaired pocket watch, he turned to me with a question that pierced the gloom. "Why do you risk so much for these clocks, Tian? What do they mean to you?" I paused, the weight of years pressing upon my shoulders. "Because they are more than machines," I said slowly. "They are the memory of those who came before us, the heartbeat of a past that must not be forgotten. They are the promise of a future where men are not bound by the tyranny of time, but masters of their own fate." Henry nodded, absorbing the gravity of my words. In that moment, I saw not just an apprentice before me, but the fragile hope of a people yearning to reclaim their freedom. Our quiet resolve was tested again when Lucille returned with news of increased arrests and a tightening noose around the underground networks. Fear whispered through the city like a poison, but it also steeled our determination. In the sanctuary of the workshop, we vowed to protect the forbidden clock and the legacy it carried. Henry, once a boy lost to the terror, now stood as a symbol of resilience, a testament to the enduring power of hope even as the shadows lengthened. As I watched him, I knew the path ahead was fraught with peril. Yet in his eyes, I glimpsed a future unshackled from fear, a world where time could once again be counted freely. The clock ticked softly in the back room, its steady rhythm a defiant heartbeat against the silence. And in that sound, I found the courage to carry on. The war for freedom was far from over, but with Henry by my side, and the memory of those lost etched into every gear and spring, I believed just barely that the light of hope might yet break through the darkest night. The chapter closes as the city sleeps uneasily beneath the watchful gaze of the Revolutionary Guards, and I, Tian Moreau, prepare to teach the next lesson not just of watchmaking, but of courage, endurance, and the fragile power of time itself. The ticking will continue. We must ensure it does, and tomorrow the fight begins anew. The workshop was cloaked in its usual shroud of muted shadows, the faint glow of a single candle flickering against the aged wooden walls. Tyne sat hunched over the forbidden clock, his fingers trembling slightly as he traced the delicate engravings on its surface. The clock was unlike any other relic that had survived the regime's ruthless purges, its ticking a whispered rebellion in a city where time itself was outlawed. For weeks, Tyne had been consumed with an obsession that bordered on desperation. The secret he suspected was hidden within the very heart of the clock. Tonight, the air seemed charged with a quiet urgency, the oppressive silence of Paris pressing against the small shop's fragile walls. Carefully, Tian lifted the clock's face, revealing a labyrinth of gears and cogs, each one humming faintly as if alive. His skilled hands searched for any anomaly, any hidden mechanism that might betray the clock's deeper secret. Then, beneath the main gear assembly, his fingers found a nearly imperceptible seam. With deliberate care, he pried open a concealed compartment. A soft scrape of metal against wood echoed softly in the stillness. Inside lay a folded piece of parchment, yellowed with age, and sealed with crimson wax bearing an unfamiliar insignia. Tyan's heart pounded as he broke the seal, unfolding the letter with reverence and trepidation. The handwriting was elegant but hurried, the ink smudged in places as if written in haste and fear. Tyne's eyes skimmed the words, absorbing the name that leapt from the page, a name he had only heard whispered in shadows, Armand Lacroix. Armand Lacroix, the last condemned man the clock counted down to. The letter told of his innocence, a secret kept by a network of sympathizers risking everything to preserve his memory. It spoke of a man unjustly sentenced, a symbol of the old world's cruelty and the new world's hope. Tyne leaned back, the candlelight casting flickering shadows on his pale face, as the weight of the revelation settled deep in his chest. The clock was far more than a mere timepiece. It was a beacon of resistance, a testament to a man whose fate was entwined with the very soul of Paris. The quiet knock at the door startled him. Lucille slipped inside, her dark eyes sharp and filled with the fierce compassion Tien had come to depend upon. "Did you find something?" she whispered, moving closer to the table. Without words, Tyne handed her the letter. Together, they read the secret testimony aloud, their voices low but resolute. Outside, the distant clatter of boots and the murmurs of the fearful city reminded them of the stakes. "This changes everything," Lucille breathed. Armand's story. It must be told. Their shared resolve ignited a fragile flame of hope amid the encroaching darkness. Before they could speak further, the door creaked open again. Jack stepped inside, his rugged face etched with fatigue and suspicion. "I heard whispers," he said, eyes darting around the cramped workshop. "The commissaire's men are tightening their nets. This letter, if discovered, could mean doom for us all." Tyne met his gaze steadily. "We knew the risks. But the truth must be protected." Jax nodded reluctantly, the tension between caution and defiance crackling like static in the air. As they secured the letter back inside its hidden compartment, the clock's ticking seemed to swell, each beat a drum of resistance against the relentless march of tyranny. Tyne stood by the window, gazing out as the city slept uneasily beneath a sky heavy with foreboding. The secret beneath the clock was no longer just his burden. It was the spark that could kindle a revolution. But time was running out, and with every tick, the shadow of the guillotine drew nearer. The flickering candlelight cast long, trembling shadows against the worn wooden walls of my workshop, where Lucille and I gathered once more to weave the fragile strands of our resistance into a tapestry strong enough to confront the relentless tide of tyranny. The air was thick with the scent of oil and wood shavings, mingling with the faint, defiant ticking of the forbidden clock hidden beneath the floorboards, a heartbeat against the silence imposed by the guillotine's shadow. Lucille's dark eyes burned with quiet fire as she traced rotes on the faintly drawn maps spread across the workbench. "The couriers are ready," she whispered, her voice steady despite the peril that clung to every word. But Dubois tightens his noose. The streets grow less safe by the hour. I nodded, my fingers absently brushing the edge of the clock's concealed casing. Each tick was a reminder not just of the passing moments, but of the defiance we embodied. "We must move swiftly," I replied, "but with care. The last thing we need is to lose what little we have built." Outside, the city of Paris throbbed with unrest. The clang of boots on cobblestones echoed like a drumbeat of oppression, and the distant cries of the condemned wolf through the narrow alleys like a mournful dirge. Yet beneath the weight of fear, a pulse of hope beat steadily in the hearts of those who dared to oppose the regime. Lucille slipped from the workshop as dusk bled into night, her figure swallowed by the fog that crept like a living thing over the city. I watched her disappear into the labyrinth of streets, carrying with her the fragile hopes of many. She was our messenger, our shield, the quiet courage that kept the flame flickering in the darkness. Hours later, the alleyways seemed empty save for the whispers of the night. Yet Lucille's presence was felt in the furtive exchanges beneath gas lamps, where trusted hands received folded notes sealed with the Resistance's mark. The scent of damp stone and burning wood mingled with the hushed breath of those who dared to dream of freedom. Meanwhile, Commissaire Dubois prowled the corridors of power with an unyielding gaze. His silhouette, dark and imposing, was a constant reminder of the regime's iron grip. Reports of clandestine meetings and suspicious movements were laid before him like weapons waiting to be wielded. His cold eyes lingered over a crude sketch of my face, a mark that tied me irrevocably to the growing storm. His mind churned with ruthless calculation. Order must be maintained, he muttered, the words a mantra to steel his resolve. Yet beneath the stern veneer, a flicker of doubt gnawed at him, a whisper that perhaps even the hardest steel could be bent by the tides of change. In the shadowed corners of a tavern far from the prying eyes of the revolutionaries, Jax and I met under the cloak of night. His rugged face bore the scars of battles past, and his eyes flickered with a mix of cynicism and reluctant hope. Our conversation was a dance of half-truths and veiled warnings, each word weighed against the cost of trust in a world rife with betrayal. "They watch closer now," Jax warned, his voice low. "Dubois is no fool. Every move we make risks everything." "Then we must be smarter," I replied. "For if we falter, the silence will consume us all." The resistance was no longer a whispered secret, it had become a living force, pulsing with the courage of those who refused to bow. Yet with every step forward, the shadow of danger grew longer. The forbidden clock's ticking was a reminder that time was both our enemy and our ally. It counted down not only the moments left for the last victim of the guillotine, but also the fleeting window for us to ignite the spark of rebellion. As the night deepened, I found myself returning to the clock. Its steady rhythm was a balm to my restless spirit, a whispered promise that the fight was not in vain. Somewhere within its mechanism lay the hope that memory and resistance could outlast even the harshest tyranny. But the question lingered like a cold breath against my neck: how long before the relentless gaze of Commissaire Dubois closed around us? How long before the fragile network we had woven unraveled into silence? In the heart of Paris, beneath the ever-watchful eyes of the regime, our story continued, etched in the ticking of a forbidden clock, in the bravery of a seamstress, in the wary glances of a scarred soldier, and in the quiet resolve of a watchmaker who dared to hold time itself at bay. The night was far from over, and the network was tightening, but so too was our resolve. The night pressed down upon Paris like a suffocating shroud, the narrow streets swallowed by a fog heavier than the chill in the air. In the cramped safe house where we gathered, the faint light of a single candle flickered against the peeling plaster walls, casting long, trembling shadows. I sat hunched over the forbidden clock, my fingers tracing its delicate mechanisms, each tick a quiet rebellion in the oppressive silence that had come to define our lives. Lucille's voice was barely above a whisper as she relayed the latest word from the underground. "Dubois's men are growing restless. They search harder, ask sharper questions. Tonight, the noose tightens." Her eyes, dark and fierce, met mine with a mixture of resolve and fear. I nodded, the weight of our secret pressing heavily on my shoulders. The clock was more than a timepiece. It was a testament to our defiance, a heartbeat of hope counting down to a fate intertwined with freedom itself. To lose it now would be to surrender the fragile spark we carried within us. Suddenly, the muffled sound of boots echoed down the street, a harsh staccato that shattered the fragile calm. My heart lurched. Lucille froze, her hand instinctively reaching for a hidden dagger beneath her cloak. I scrambled to my feet, the clock clutched tightly in my hands. The door burst open with a violent crash. Revolutionary guards flooded the room, their faces set in grim determination. Commissaire Dubois himself stepped forward, tall and imposing, his cold gaze sweeping over us like a winter gale. "Search the premises," he commanded, voice as hard as the steel of his blade. No corner left unturned. Time slowed as panic and calculation warred within me. The forbidden clock, our secret, could not be found. I had to act. With trembling hands, I began to disassemble the clock, a practiced motion born of countless hours in my workshop. Lucille moved silently to the window, peering through the shutters as the guards advanced, their boots scraping against the worn floorboards. Jax, ever the pragmatist, engaged the guards' intense conversation, his voice low and measured. I caught snippets, questions about contraband, whispers of betrayal, threats veiled beneath polite words. As I hid the clock's components beneath loose floorboards, each piece a fragment of our fragile hope, The room seemed to close in around us. Sweat trickled down my spine, my breath shallow. The guards' search was thorough, their hands overturning crates, rifling through cupboards. Dubois' gaze lingered on me, sharp and unyielding. A bead of sweat traced my temple as I met his stare, refusing to betray what lay beneath my feet. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the guards withdrew, their footsteps receding into the foggy night. The heavy silence that followed was broken only by the faint, imagined ticking of the concealed clock. We exhaled collectively, relief washing over us but tempered by the knowledge that the danger was far from over. Trust, once solid, now felt fragile and fractured. Whispers of betrayal gnawed at our resolve. Lucille's hand found mine, a silent promise amidst the shadows. "We survived tonight," she said. "But the fight has just begun." In the quiet that followed, I allowed myself a moment to listen to the silence, to the echo of footsteps fading into the night, and to the relentless, defiant heartbeat of a clock that would soon mark the turning of fate itself. The night was a reckoning, a test of courage and cunning. And as dawn approached, I knew that the shadows of Paris held secrets deeper than any guillotine's blade, and that our resistance, fragile as it was, had been forged anew in fire and fear.